everybody. This is a humorous history podcast. We are the Goofy Historians. Today, we're going to talk about the Taiping Rebellion, which happened from 1850 to 1864. Last time, we set up the story by discussing the Opium War and the decline of the Qing dynasty. So today, we're going to get started and talk about Hong Zhiquan becoming Jesus' brother, and it all starts with the civil service exams that Hong Jesus couldn't pass. But first, some reflections. Our U.S. Civil War lasted 4 years and almost 700,000 Americans died. And I'm not discounting every person that died is a tragedy. But in perspective here, the Taiping Rebellion lasted 14 years and cost 20 million souls. So we can't even try to get our mind around those numbers, but they're exponentially larger. So how can the China of today not have been influenced by that when our own Civil War, damaged our psyche until today? And I just want to go over a couple of things. We're definitely not going to cover every detail, every aspect, every fact, or even every battle. But I do want to just jump in with the Imperial Exams, because that's a great place to get started, because that's when Hong Zhou-Xun.
Yeah.
That's where
any of the three of us are going to get.
That was a sign from our Heavenly Father.
From Hong Zhou-Xun that we pronounced his name wrong.
Oh, shit.
Back up there with Jesus.
Okay, we have Haley Beckel with us today again. Thank you, Haley. And Haley's got a new area again with flowers and everything. Hi, Haley.
Yep. Hi, David. Hi, Joseph. Yeah, as I was telling you guys earlier, my mom texted me from the last episode, and she told me that I needed to move locations because being in the bedroom, I was next to the window, and she said, "Oh, that was washing you out. You didn't look good." So I've changed locations now. If she's watching this, hi, Mom. I hope you like the flowers in the back.
That's great. A shout out to your mom.
Yeah.
Hi, Mom. You and your dad, I want to congratulate them both. They have a very lovely daughter. That sounds like a song.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay, so the Imperial Exams were so crazy. They lasted through several dynasties. And this was supposed to be my part of the program. I was supposed to talk about the Imperial Exams, but frankly, and I know a lot about them because I've listened to great courses, lectures, and read about them. Truth be told, they give me anxiety just thinking about them, the stress that those students went through. But they were so awesome in a way, and they kept the society really hitting on all cylinders because it had buy-in from the emperor, it had buy-in from the people. It was a way to have the peasants raise up in society. The specifics I'll kind of just brush over with broad strokes, and then you guys can fill in the details. But there was 3 levels of exams. The first exam was like the local exams, and like 2 to 3 million Chinese applied for it. And it was like every 18 months, I think. The second was kind of a subset of that, the provincial exams. And the last exams were like the big times. That's like when you make the pros or something. They were direct to the emperor with their 8-legged essays. But that's all the specifics, but they were brutal. Our SATs are nothing like that. And they didn't have a number 2 pencil.
It was all done in ink. Yeah. And you have to remember, they have to imagine doing the SATs and you were also going to be graded on penmanship, right? It wasn't just they had to get everything right. They had like 10,000 characters. They had 10 to 20,000 characters they had to memorize, right? And then do it with a brush, right? So they had to they were graded on how well their calligraphy was in addition to their knowledge. And they had to go in, they couldn't have any cheat sheets. They had to go in there only with their little inkwell and their brush. And they went into like for the 100-page thing was like a week, right? They went into these little cells and they gave them the questions, and they had like a week to compose their answers, right? But so each level of the exams, only like 1 to 5% of the people ever passed those exams. So if it started off with 1 million, 2 million at the county level, right? By the time they got to the provincial level, there was only like 100,000 left. By the time it got to the capital level, there was like 1,000 or 2,000 left, and of those, only 50 to 100 would pass. So starting with 2 million, like in Little League, but that time they went through AA, AAA, and got to the pros, there was just like baseball, right? There was nobody left, right? And then after they have these 50 guys left, they have one more actually to do. They've still passed, right? But they do one more that goes directly to the emperor, and the emperor is going to read it, and he's going to decide the top 3, 1, 2, and 3, and those are like what would you call like going to the Hall of Fame or something in baseball. So, but if you make it, so what's your probability of making it? 2 million people start, 50 people make it. It's huge, but it was a whole culture.
It was a great thing if you did pass, because you got like guaranteed job for life. But
and you didn't even need to pass it. I mean, just having sat for the exams gives you a prestige, right? To say that I sat for the county level exams, that means you're going to get a job at least as a penmanship instructor, right? Or, as a low level clerk or something. So you're employed for life just having sat for the exams. And passing the county exams is the same as getting like a law degree from some night school law thing. So you at least become a licentiate or like a lawyer, even at the lowest levels. So it's not like you don't get anything, but very few people ever make it to the capital level exams.
So all these people ended up running the empire, which was, I don't know, it just seems weird to me, because the stuff that they were learning, this Confucius stuff that from hundreds of, like from Aristotle or Plato's time, that's crazy. And then they would have to, they would like practice when they could recite it backwards and all this stuff. But for whatever reason, it worked. And it worked all the way up until 1905, when they finally said this is the last
all these
of it.
Europeans who were studying calculus.
Right.
And engineering. I mean, one of the parts of the Imperial exam was actually writing poetry, right? So you really were a cultured gentleman, right? You were a dignified, cultured gentleman who was so we had all these gentleman scholars running the government, right? Which is a pretty good if you're an isolated empire, but when you're coming against all these people who studied calculus and were playing video games, right? It's hard to compete. So they had a superior civilization in terms of culture, right?
Yeah, it would have been a great place to be, like in the 16th and 17th centuries, probably.
Yeah.
I don't know though. The
our poor Hung Jo Chuen, he didn't pass any of them.
Yeah, we're gonna get to him in just a second. Yeah. I have something. Haley, do you have anything to add on these Imperial exams? Are they stressing you out too?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, also, they spent years and years studying to take these exams. And when you mentioned failing, yeah, that must have been a huge blow. Also, being in a prison cell, in my mind, when I, heard the word cell, I'm thinking like, okay, they're bringing you out, they're taking everything from you. Then they're bringing you out to this prison cell. They're like, you're going to stay here for 3 days and you're going to take this exam. And this may take a week too. So it's like, are they feeding you? Are you sleeping there? Are they taking care of you? I mean, this is crazy to me.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, and also they have like like in Guangzhou, one of the big ones, right? And I've actually been to some of those testing sites, but they have like the two big vats of water, right? One for drinking for all 3,000 licentiates are sitting for the exam. One for bathing, right? So all these people are bathing out of the same water, and then they have one big latrine, open latrine for everybody. Right? So, and I mean, they have the exams in the middle of the Guangzhou summer, which is very hot and humid, right? It must have, it would drive.
You know what? That's so funny because I think that gave the lower classes a leg up, if you will, because if you were a rich kid and you lived like in a palace and that was your first, you would be so freaked out you couldn't even concentrate. But the lower classes are probably like, yeah, whatever.
So we could do a whole thing on cheating in the exam, right? So they always had these little cheat sheets where one of them they found like a 6.5 times 6.5 little thing with like 10,000 characters written on it, right? That they could stick in some orifice of the body because everybody was searched, right, before they went in, right? So I don't know where they got that. It was like a little thing where you could sneak in. And other like poor people actually sat for the exam, like even I guess people do for the SAT, right? They're professional test takers, right? So you have these lower class people going in and taking the test for the upper class people, and then doing the switcheroo. So it was a whole, I mean, even cheating was a whole industry, right? So when people showed up for these exams, it's like, so 3,000 or 4,000 licentiates are going to sit for it. They bring their families, they bring their grandparents. It's like a huge thing. So like every 3 years, like the population of Guangzhou, expands by, X times X10 or something. So it was a big thing, especially, all your family is just waiting for you. It's like your mother watching you play Little League all the way through high school and college, and then trying out for the major or professional baseball and then not making it, right?
The good thing about it was that you could fail a million times, and people did.
That's
they
right.
tried. So as soon as they failed, they had a freak out probably, and then they started studying again.
Right? Because I mean, the awards for winning are huge, right? Just huge. So certainly, I'd study for them. I mean, they start studying when they're like 5, 4 or 5. They start learning their Chinese characters and learning the classics. And remember, they have to do it in the original Chinese, not the Chinese spoken at their time. Right,
yeah,
they're
a language that nobody
like
even
writing
speaks
all this
anymore.
stuff in classical Chinese. Like we would have to learn Latin or Greek in order to pass the SAT and then get judged on penmanship. It's like becoming
Yeah, it did end up a lot like being like Latin. It was the language for the educated. All right, so the Imperial exams were tough, but I'm gonna just segue right into Hong Jesus here. Unless anybody has anything about the exams, because
one thing about that, you have to say that they've been going on for like 2,000 years now, right? Basically, after Qing Shi Huangdi burnt all the scrolls and buried the scholars alive, right? Once he was gone, they had to dig up those scholars and see if any of them were still alive. And then they had to find these scholars to actually remember what everybody had written down. And then the few scholars who were left had to teach everybody else, right? So that's how this whole exam thing started happening, because, the chicken guy, whatever his name, the mud chicken guy, had to create a bureaucracy, right? Lu Bang, I remember.
Oh, Lu Bang, I remember that guy with the mud chicken.
So he said, "What am I going to do, man? Shi Huangdi had just killed all the bureaucracy, and I've got to create one, right?" So that's sort of how it started.
Well, good for him. He should have been known for that, not mud chicken. Right. So now we're going to dive off into some opinions, and these are just my opinions. They're not Haley's. They're not Joseph's. Necessarily, they might agree with me. I don't know. Hong Jesus was a freaking psychopath. Okay, he was a psychopath. Look, so Jeffrey Dahmer had a hard childhood, probably, right?
Yeah, I assume
he didn't. It's still not okay to eat people. This guy was a psychopath. Okay, so let's start with he failed the first exam and then he tried again. And then he got a little religious track. And this is the part of the story I'm not so sure I even believe. So the Christian missionaries were all over China doing their stuff.
Yeah, because this is after the Opium War, where part of the contract was that you have to let opium in, and you have to let our religious fanatics in. So it's like the opiate of the masses, or it's actual opiate. take your choice.
Exactly. So I think it was during the second exam, one of the minister or Christians handed him a little tract, and he said he didn't read it. He put it aside, failed the exam, and then had the major freak out and had visions. And he had a vision that just happened to be a lot like the little Jesus tract that he had got that he didn't read. I'm calling bullshit on that. I think he did read it, and then he had the freak out, and then he had the dreams. But that's totally my opinion. But anyway, so it gets a convoluted story. He has like a Moses guy that he converts, and then that guy converts a bunch of people that they had thought that he was Jesus, and he didn't even realize it until he went and saw him. Okay, so I know I totally messed that story up because I got so wound up with the whole, he's a psychopath. He is. I don't know. Is that just my opinion? He was responsible for 20 million people dying.
That's well, another thing about that, 20 million people died in the revolution, which is it's called the Taiping Tianhua, which means the great peace of heaven, right? Which is ironic, right? Since it killed 20 million people, it's not very peaceful. And the other thing, I mean, there was also altogether there was 100 million people killed during the revolution because due to the disruption, the fires, the famines that it caused, the floods that it caused, and China's population at that time was only like 400 million people. Maybe 450 million people. So basically the result of that revolution alone destroyed 20% of their population. And that wasn't the only revolution going on. There was another revolution going on further west, southwest. There was a Islamic revolution where they were trying to get away from the Qing Empire, and not even a count. There was the Opium Wars, English trying to come in, attacking the capital. So poor Qing, they just had it coming from every side.
That's right. So that's so funny. That's why this is so complex, because like you said, there was actually two other rebellions going on at the same time as the Taiping Rebellion. Plus, there were pirates, which Haley knows about.
Yeah, the pirates.
There were pirates. This is such a great story. You had pirates, a psychopath, Europeans,
religious fanatic,
psychopath cult leader, Jesus fanatic, 2 or 3 European powers that didn't know which side to be on. And you know what happened at the end? The Qing retained control.
The Qing retained control, which was amazing, right? I mean, remember, it was the English and the French mainly who were there, and they had just stopped fighting each other a few years ago, right? And the French were Catholic, who didn't like this Hong Chu-chun, because he's if anything, he's a Protestant, right? It's more like a snake handler, evangelical holy roller, and they're going, no, we don't want that. Whatever Christianity we don't want that type. Right? We want to convert the emperor to Catholicism, right, and then make it a nice Catholic country. And the English. So actually, the main guy who worked with Hang Chu-chun was a evangelical from Tennessee, actually, of all things. But it turns out he wasn't that bad of a guy. He was kind of a interesting guy. Can I just say a couple words about him, since I'm usually anti-evangelical, right? But I like this guy. And there was another guy before him called Gutzlaff, right? And he doesn't come there as like a church lady, right? Dressed as an Englishman with a little bowler hat and all this sort of cultural imperialism. He actually, this is amazing. He goes in there. He cuts his hair like the Chinese with the queue and the shaved head. Dresses as a Chinese. Learns the Hakka language, right? Learns multiple dialects of their language. He goes without shoes. He leaves the English thing and lives among the poorest of the poor of these Chinese people in order to convert them to Christianity. I thought that, it's not like he was like coming in there from, lording it over them. He actually became, well, like what you would think of a true Jesus, maybe, a humble Jesus, right? But I don't know how effective he was, and he died of malaria, a few years later. But you got to. I think he gets some stars in my. Unlike Hung Jo-chwin, who ended up killing 20 million people directly, and maybe another 80 million on top of that.
Yeah, there were some characters that were admirable, notable. My favorite was the guy that ended up running the army for the emperor. I'm gonna say his name. What's his name?
Townsend or Gordon?
Shit. Anyway, he ended up being the most powerful guy at the end of the war, and he could have, been an emperor. He could have just taken control. But
so his name was like Zheng Guofang.
Exactly, that guy.
So it's funny because that's just the opposite. He's the guy who passed the friggin' exam, right? He goes, listen, I just spent my whole friggin' life studying for this exam, and I just passed it. You're not gonna do away with it, right? I mean, this. I've spent too much time on this. So he's coming from just the opposite, and he's a non-Hakka. He's like a Han Chinese, and he thinks because the Hakka Chinese, well, that's another thing. I mean, people think of Chinese, they think of, from like our point of view, they all seem like homogenous, but there was subgroups within China, and the Hakka Chinese, besides the native people who weren't even Chinese, were sort of an isolated group down there, right? And they were not considered a prestige group. So one of the things when Hung Jo-chwin came along, right, he gave them, no, you are the important ones. Because when he went up to Jesus, right, when he had his dream and he went up to Jesus, guess what Jesus was speaking? He wasn't speaking Mandarin. He was speaking Hakka, right? So it just goes to show you that Hakka, Jesus is on their side. Why does he show up to the Hakka and nobody else?
Understood. So, yeah, it was such confusing times. We're kind of running down to the end of this, and I just want to go back, take a step back a little bit and talk about the confusion that was going on because both sides of the English Parliament had different views on this, whether they should be neutral, whether they shouldn't, but it's all fascinating. But the most fascinating part is the pirates. And Haley, can you talk about the pirates at all? What was going on with the pirates? There was one pirate lady who was so cool.
Yeah.
So let me see what I can try to remember. But there is a video that I did.
Oh yeah, let's put that in there.
Yeah, we'll put that in the link. Yeah, there was this pirate queen, and yeah, she got this whole army together. I remember that. And so she was a leader. She was with this guy too. So he was the pirate. She was I believe she was like a prostitute of some form in China. And then there was this guy that she met, and he was so taken by her that he said, marry me, come with me. And then she was like, only if you let me control part of your fleet, have a stake in this. And he says, okay. So then they come along, and then they have this whole pirate army together. She's the leader, though. She's the one that's getting all the people. They're plundering those ships, and they're taking everything. They get in a fight with the emperor. The emperor has to settle with them and let everybody go free. It's this whole thing. It's a great video. You guys should watch it.
Also, I definitely will. Go ahead.
Yeah, also, I want to say that about Chinese Jesus, I think he's a little bit of a Joan of Arc in my way of thinking. Yeah, I'd say he's a little bit of a Joan of Arc. I mean, he fails this exam. He's in this cell. He's taking this exam and he's going crazy. He keeps failing. And I think that maybe he saw that pamphlet and then he goes and he starts having visions like Joan of Arc because he's just so, maybe he's so exhausted from taking this exam. And then so he goes, I'm Jesus's little brother. You just, I don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think the fact that his whole family was a lower class family, and he was obviously very smart, right? I mean, the fact that maybe his penmanship wasn't up to snuff, or his poetry wasn't, but he was a very smart man, and he should have passed. If any reasonable thing, he would have passed. So by just the fact that he let his family down, right? I mean, when you're like the one hope of, because if you pass an exam, it's like it elevates your whole family. It's not just you, right? It doesn't only just elevate your family for one generation, it will elevate your family for multiple generations. So all of a sudden, all these people are like, you're our hope, and then you're not our hope, right? But he has the vision of Jesus. What he interprets as Jesus later, right? He doesn't realize apparently he says that he doesn't realize it's Jesus at the time. So apparently Jesus doesn't introduce himself fully. But when he goes to heaven, he stays up there for like years. He has 2 kids in heaven with the primary moon goddess or something. So yeah, and Jesus has like a 18-year-old daughter himself. It's I think after his whole thing started, that vision he had when he was sick after exam gets more and more and more elaborate as they go on, right?
He was a psychopath. He's a nutbag. It's so crazy. The more I read about him, the crazier he becomes. There's all these different, the Wing King, the Shield King. It's just nonsense. It's all nonsense. But they did manage to put together an army that was really good for a while.
Yeah. One thing, the good things what's funny imagine basing your whole version of Christianity like on a chick track. Remember those chick tracks, like where they had hand out at the 70s? It was
exactly. So yeah, I remember having one of those little tracks when I was a kid, and it was like, what do you miss about being a Christian? And you'd open it up and it would be like, hell. It's just
it's like a little cartoon they handed out, right? And it's like this guy who's like a drug addict, and then the guy comes and he tries to save him, and he doesn't save him, and then at the end, last thing you see about this guy is him going off to hell. So it was like, wonder if that's all you ever knew of Christianity, right? It's like, that's like the Christianity so they had to fill in a lot of the gaps, right? So one of the things that was true that when he went back and started preaching, he couldn't remember all 10 commandments. So he could only come up with 7 of them. And the 7th one was don't use opium, right?
There you go.
And one of them was don't gamble. So he was a little vague on the details of Christianity. So he sort of filled in the gap for all of this stuff. And one of the things was equality among the genders, which is the best thing, right? I think, right? So
yeah, I don't know about that. It was more like separate than
he did in the end. He separated the genders, right? So I don't know about that. But there was 100,000 women fighting his army as soldiers. So there is.
There you go. And they didn't have their feet bound that we talked about yesterday. So we're coming up. This is gonna run out of time here for us pretty quickly, but I'm just glad. I just hope that our little country in our short little life doesn't experience a Chinese Jesus type of Joan of Arc character, because we could go without losing that many people. But I just wanted to say that we're not real historians. We don't try to be real historians. And I personally, I feel pretty out of touch. I don't feel qualified at all talking about China. We're going to do one more show kind of summing this all up and talk about the Boxer Rebellion and how they kicked out the Europeans and stuff like that. But China's a tough subject. And if you enjoyed this, please hit subscribe. Consider supporting us on Patreon and buy a hat. Thank you guys for everything. Appreciate y'all.